Hello, good afternoon. We're going to get started because we have lots and lots to tell you. I have to thank the City of Charlottesville for providing the venue for today's event and for broadcasting this program on Charlottesville's TV 10. During the question and answer portion, we would ask that you wait for a microphone to be brought to you so that you can be recorded appropriately. Thank you. This program is, of course, sponsored by the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, but especially by Cyber World and the Blue Ridge Writers, who have put out this Skyline 2017, which fifth anthology? Fourth anthology. Okay. The Blue Ridge Writers are a chapter of the Virginia Writers Club, the oldest statewide writers group. We will, our authors will sell their own books afterwards, so you're welcome to come up. They'll sign, answer personal questions. The anthology is, I just want to say that. Okay. I am Sarah Collins Honenberger, a novelist, recovering lawyer, 20 years gone now. We need you to silence your cell phones. Tweet if you'd like to the hashtag VABook2017. We welcome you on behalf of the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, and we thank you for attending. The festival is free of charge but not free of cost. Please remember to go online to give back or pick up an envelope at the information desk at the Omni. Support the festival. Saturday is the Lit Fair, and there's lots more books for sale, including the books of the authors that have spoken on the different panels. Please fill out your program evaluations. That's useful information, helps to keep the festival free, and you can put down your favorite author who hasn't come yet, and maybe they'll come next year. Okay, I am going to introduce our panelists. We have, to my immediate right, Phyllis Maggie Duncan. She has been accused since elementary school of having an overactive imagination. She's a commercial pilot, a former FAA safety official, an avid book reviewer, and grandmother. Welcome. A little known fact, she's a fan of Dale Earnhardt Jr. and the Yankees. Her latest novel, I've missed something here. Sorry. I'll let her tell you about her latest novel, what she's working on. The anthology includes her piece, this is so mixed up, sorry. Her latest novel, or one of her novels, is Who Watches the Watchmen. All of her novels are available on Amazon. Really messed that up.
It's okay.
Sorry, I don't know, my computer missed a line. Okay, next we have Susan Lannerman. She writes human interest stories for the commentary section of the Charlottesville's Daily Progress, and for a number of years co-authored the Hook column on The Block. She's polishing her first novel for young adults, Hasta Luego, Santa Claus, about a teenager from a family of illegal immigrants. Her career spans 9 years of managing the online journal Neurosurgical Focus, after writing for the marketing departments of PC Connection and Mary Hitchcock Memorial Hospital. She currently works for an architecture firm and manages a restored Victorian B&B, the inspiration for her short story collection in progress. And Jack Trammell is the author of over 20 books. Born in Berea, Kentucky, his range is as wide as the Blue Ridge Mountains. He's a full-time professor at Randolph-Macon, a trained historian, environmental advocate, and agrarian. His novels, poems, and narrative nonfiction uniquely celebrate Central Virginia. And his latest nonfiction book, The Fourth Branch of Government, We the People, reflects insights from his run for U.S. Congress in 2014. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to let each panelist tell you a little bit about how their career impacts their writing and vice versa, because that's what the panel is about. And then they can read, if they would like to, a short selection so you hear their voice. Phyllis?
Well, actually, the way that my former career integrates is that I had to retire in order to have time to write. I worked for the Federal Aviation Administration, as Sarah said, and after spending 10 to 12 hours a day on a computer, coming home in the evening and trying to write was was not working. So I reached a point where I could retire and devote myself to writing. And in the 7.5 years I've been retired, I've completed, in various stages of completion, a whole bunch of novels and novellas and novelettes that I'm working on. I was an aviation safety inspector, and some of that works its way into my writing, but people are kind of surprised that I didn't retire and write cozy mysteries about airplanes and airports. I don't know, I made an unconscious decision not to really put a lot of aviation in my work. I don't know why, I just didn't, but time to time things pop up that are aviation related, and I'm glad I have the background to be able to explore that accurately.
Did you want to read a little bit?
Sure, I'll read from the story that's in here called Reset. It's looked on as child abuse today, but by the time I was 8 or so, I could shoot a pistol and a rifle, and I could do so without managing to kill myself or anyone else. One reason for that might have been I could shoot only when my father was home. He was in the Army, and we, my mother and I, didn't live on base with him. I'd pretend, though, using sticks and branches I found in the wooded area behind our house. Even then, I followed all his safety rules. This was in the days when I adored him, when every word he uttered was golden, and disobeying him was a sin. I wasn't even 9 when he bundled me in layers and layers of coats and socks and my snow boots and took me to Washington, D.C. On the way, I got a civics lessons about elections and how this country was different from the one he'd recently been stationed in, how every 4 years we could change our leader, and we didn't do it with tanks in the streets, but in voting booths. A few months before that, he had taken me with him to the Baptist church in town, the First Baptist one where the good Baptists went, not the Second Baptist one where the sinning Baptists went. At school, Baptists of both persuasions had called my father and me a papist. I didn't know what it meant, but I didn't like it. With a sheet of paper and a pen in hand, he took me into a booth with a curtain across the opening. After he closed the curtain, he said, "This is a ballot. This is how we choose our government. Not everybody gets to do this, but in our country, everyone who is eligible to vote gets a say in how the country is run. It's called one man, one vote."
Susan.
I'm going to read first. First I want to thank the Blue Ridge Writers for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm a newbie. And this is an article that was part of a travel section in the Daily Progress. And it's Trains, Planes, and Autobuses. Americans are woefully resistant to public transportation. We are accustomed to being masters of our own destinations. So when my husband and I began preparations to take various modes of transport across Italy, I experienced terror of the unknown. I anxiously collected information about the locations of public transit, public parking, and most important, public restrooms. Our dining room table was strewn with guidebooks, maps, and CDs as if we were about to launch a covert attack. None of my planning revealed what I found on our bumpy road through Tuscany. Italy is a maze, and you are the marble. So it's best to pick up your bags and roll with it. We survived our adventure, and here's how we did it. No gelatos barred. Upon disembarking at the airport in Rome, we were met by a pleasant-looking man inquiring politely if we could use an inexpensive transport. Naturalmente, we replied, missing the sign, "Do not accept rides in unofficial vehicles." We followed him to a shabby van. As the dented door slammed shut, I realized the road to Rome was probably paved with naive tourists. Groping for a non-existent seatbelt, I clung to my hubby as we shot out onto the autostrada. Hell hath no fury like a driver in Rome. We came in for a landing in front of our hotel, dazed and relieved. The cost for a ride was less than a cab, more than a train ticket, and the experience was priceless. We wisely chose a hotel near the center of the city. Although it was raining, my husband insisted that roaming by foot would give us the lay of the land. When you have to narrow your wardrobe to a glorified backpack on wheels, one should invest in sneakers and a waterproof poncho and say arrivederci to fashion. We left all electronics home for fear of being pillaged and relied on old school maps. Circling concentrically, we hit most of our targets with the exception of the Pantheon, Thomas Jefferson's inspiration for Monticello. Next, we braved the metro for a pilgrimage to the Vatican. As the door of the metro peeled open, it revealed travelers packed like sardines. Claustrophobia be damned, we dove in. Like Alice in Wonderland, we were enticed with choices: descend to the tombs, stroll the gardens, or my husband's choice, climb to the top of the basilica. There was an option to ride an elevator halfway up to the top of St. Peter's, but he would not be enticed by convenience, so we climbed the entire 550 or so steps to the top. But after conquering the summit, we found the views were nothing short of spectacular. The next foray into public transportation was a tourist bus headed to Naples. As our bus winded its narrow way up to the villainous Vesuvius, we chatted with the bus driver and discovered it was his maiden voyage. Nearing the top of this steaming precipice, we were met by a line of buses bearing down on us. Our driver's only choice was to drive backward down the railless mountainside. One slip, and we too might be buried in Herculaneum. At the base, the passengers thundered, "Bravo!" as we checked that mode of transportation off our list. Our next excursion was to Florence, where we'd be going by train. Finding the right track to board seemed impossible. For this reason, one must have the phrase, "Where is the train to Florence?" written in Italian on the palm of your sweaty hand. Fortunately, the information magically appeared just prior to the time we needed to board. Once in Florence, we reserved a car despite hearing horror stories about how wild Italian drivers were. Having wheels allowed us to speed like the plague throughout Tuscany and Umbria. At week's end, we only had one minor mishap. While a U.S. car rental agency would have been picky, the Italian agency was not so. We returned the car a little al dente, and it wasn't a problem. Before flying home from Rome, we took one last sentimental ride around the city on the top of a double-decker bus, and from this vantage point, we located the Pantheon. Be advised, all roads and modes of transportation should lead you to Italy.
Jack?
Well, I got started writing. I was one of those nerds who was a very little kid and had a mom who wrote and a dad who wrote, and I wanted to be a writer. So when I got to college, my first job was delivering pizzas, and it was an interesting job because you could sit for hours on end and do nothing, but then you could work for an hour and a half straight. So I decided I was going to write my first novel in between delivering pizzas. And I did that, and that novel has never seen the light of day, but it got me started. My first job as a shoe salesman with JCPenney, I had a union-mandated 30-minute break. I would go back in the shoe storage room, and I would write and come back out and resume work. Well, in my mid-20s, I was fortunate enough to get a job teaching in the public schools, and I made the wonderful discovery that not only could I teach young people to write, but it was an excuse for me to write myself even at work. And so for 26 years, I've been an educator and I've been teaching people how to write, and it's been an excuse for me to say I get paid to write. And that's my writing story, and I'll read to you a short excerpt from the story that I have in here called Snake Bit. Colston tried to wiggle his feet in the bottom of the sleeping bag and barely felt a response, and it was not the response he had hoped for. It was delayed and confused, as if his feet didn't know what he wanted them to do. The right one was increasingly numb. About calf level was lightning hot pain. He moaned and shot his head out of the sleeping bag. It was a cool night, but he was burning up alive. "Hurry up, Elroy," he said out loud, grunting for oxygen. "Hurry up, for God's sake." Somewhere further down the mountain, Elroy had gone for help. They both knew that a bite from the eastern diamondback, the king, as it was known locally, was the most dangerous and potentially deadly, and that even the copperhead didn't compare. Coulson closed his eyes and tried not to worry. Even so, his head was filled with heavy, unshakable thoughts. He was to be married in a month. He was to go to Richmond next week to meet his brother. He was to carry water up to the church the next day. There was too much to do to be here, sweating and puffing and hurting. "Come on, Elroy," he said again. He knew Elroy couldn't hear him by now, but it was a kind of prayer, a way of distracting himself from the idea that he might actually be dying.
So how many writers do we have in the audience? Okay, all right. How about this, guys? Creativity is hard to schedule. So what do you do to keep track of your new ideas or those sparks of creativity in the midst of your daily minutia and keeping up with deadlines and things like that at the office?
Well, I work from my home, and I'm a pretty strict boss, but I always carry a notebook with me because I have babysitting responsibilities, and that takes me away from the office now. So I always carry a notebook to jot down things. I love going to coffee shops or bars and listening to people talk, and I will write down what they say, and sometimes that inspires some dialogue or a story idea. I have on occasion, like when I'm driving, I have used the record function on my phone when something strikes me, but I normally try to work about 2 hours in the morning, about 3 hours in the afternoon on writing and editing. And I turn off the TV and I don't turn on the social media while I'm doing it, because otherwise I'd be like, oh, look, what happened now? And it's just, you have to develop a discipline to do that. So it's much like when I was at work. I had a schedule, I had things I had to do literally every minute of the day. And this is a little better because I get to decide when my time is scheduled. So,
Susan?
I love using sticky notes. And so my computer at work and my daily planner are decorated in multicolored little sticky notes. But the problem I found is that they are sticky enough to actually attach themselves to something that might get thrown away, like a Kleenex in your purse or other things that are around the office. So I also use my cell phone, and there is an electronic version of the sticky note pad on it. And so I don't have to worry about my brilliant idea being thrown away at the end of the day. I also use my cell phone because for some reason I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep and I have a brilliant idea, and then I have to fumble for my glasses and then fumble for the light and then try to find paper and a pen that works, and usually it wakes up my husband. So that doesn't work, and oftentimes I'll fall back to sleep and think, I'll remember this in the morning, and of course that doesn't happen. So now I can put my phone to sleep when I put myself to sleep, and it turns off all of the notifications and the sound so that it will glow when I pick it up, and I can still type without disturbing anyone. So that has really helped me when I have inspirations late at night. And I can also email myself copies of things. So if I'm worried about sticky notes, I do the same thing. I get on and I might send something to myself that will help me with an essay in the future. So that's what I do.
Jack?
Well, I have 3 tips. I am a night owl, and I married a morning person. It works very well. I get a lot done late at night. The second tip is I use my work email. I call it constantly with my ideas and to talk to myself about what I want to write. And when the messages are filled up, nobody else can leave a message, so I never have to deal with other people's messages. The last thing is I'm a sociologist and I teach sociology, and I've learned through my sociological training that everybody sees the world a little bit differently. So in everything that you do, it may seem mundane and ordinary and even boring to you, but as a writer, you have to remember that you see it in a way that nobody else does, and that's key to almost anything you want to do creatively.
How about, I mean, I know nowadays lots of people have jobs at home, and so they're not necessarily in an office, but clearly when you're out in the world in a working environment, you meet up with people that are different from you and interesting. And have you ever used parts of those people or those people and then gotten yourself into trouble because you've picked a character that's too recognizable?
Well, when my first book came out in the year 2000, it was a collection of short stories, and a lot of them were based on my family. And I have a couple of cousins who don't speak to me anymore, but that's okay. I've often joked that in my work, because I write about espionage, that I've managed to figuratively kill off a couple of my bosses.
Susan?
Well, I do write essays for the paper, and my husband and I started buying tickets to the UVA baseball games a couple of years ago, and we have seats right behind the umpire. And one particularly difficult series, we were sitting in the peanut gallery, and the other season ticket holders were basically giving the ump a hard time and even giving the players a hard time. So I wrote a commentary about the impact of bad sportsmanship and happened to mention that I was at a game, etc. And so when we came to the next game, we were shunned by the people in our row. But it's been much more pleasant to listen to the games being played.
The power of writing! How about you, Jack? You must write. How about Dave Brat? You written about Dave Brat?
I think it's difficult. My daughter and my stepdaughter, I once found them having an argument over one of my young adult novels about who I had modeled the female character after, which one of them. So I solved that by, in the subsequent editions, having a little thing in the front that said it was for both of them. And so it is something you have to pay attention to. And Charles Dickens once famously had a fight with his mistress, and in a fit of rage, he went out into the street and burned a bunch of his manuscripts, and they were unique. They are books and articles and things we'll never have from Charles Dickens now. And I think about a story I wrote about a family wedding, and I have deleted it from all computers. No copy of it exists anymore. And I think it could have placed with the New Yorker, based on our conversation earlier. But it doesn't exist anymore. And so it's something you have to think about sometimes.
Do you think that writing has brought you a certain, practicing your writing and editing your writing and working at your writing, because you all are fairly experienced writers, has changed the way you deal with people at work, that you have a better empathy maybe, or that you're more patient or less patient, or do you think it helps you in your job? With your grandchildren? Or your daughter-in-law?
Fortunately, I don't have a daughter-in-law.
A son-in-law.
I have a son-in-law, and he's good. Even when I was dabbling at writing while I worked full-time, I found that if I took a characteristic from somebody I knew and put it into that character, that fictional character, that I sometimes softened it a bit. And I think that was I'm sure that was out of empathy, more than anything. But now, yeah, because I've lately been writing about a lot of dark stuff, and I'm a little nicer to people as a result. So I think writing did that for me. It made me look at made me look at the human condition with a more open mind.
Susan?
Well, I divide my time between working in an office, in an architect's office, and then running a bed and breakfast. So the bed and breakfast has provided comical material to expand upon, which I'm working on, and it's not quite on par with Faulty Towers, but after 9 years I've collected some very strange but true tales. So I don't have to really, if I write about anyone, it's going to not be too obvious to someone if they've never picked up, a paper and read an essay I've written, so I'm not worried about that. And if I do publish this book, I don't think I have to worry about the interactions with someone. My family also provides a lot of material. We have a very colorful Italian family, and we are a family of storytellers, so they've provided also a plethora of amusing anecdotes, which I do put in. I haven't heard that any of them have been taken negatively. So I don't think I would ever write about my office job, though. I think I'll keep that separate.
I have written about a few of my bosses, and I have written about Dave Brat too. So I think language is what connects us as humans, and so it's hard to use language and not to feel connected to humans. I think people can do that, but I think we default a lot of the times towards being more empathetic and toward understanding the differences that people have when we use language richly. And so for me, being a writer has gone hand in hand with appreciating the complexity of the world and the people in it, and has made me more empathetic, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the anthology and the whole anthology process. Publication credits. Given the range of writing in an anthology, that you have beginning writers, writers who've won contests, writers who are invited, you've got nonfiction, fiction, and poetry, so that a reader picking this up who traditionally reads just nonfiction is going to get a taste of some fiction or some poetry. How as a writer do you decide where to submit? And I don't know, Phyllis, if you've done short pieces or not.
Yeah.
At what publications seem to be better at helping your career or getting you more notice, or how do you go about that process, kind of deciding where to submit and what to submit?
Well, I don't do much short stuff right now. I love short stories, and I love writing them. I used a program called Duotrope, and now you have to subscribe. It's $50 a year, but it's a pretty good database that you can go plug in. You can find literary journals, you can find anthologies, you can even find publishers that are taking, novels, novellas, whatever. And I've used them, but I've also leveraged being a member of Blue Ridge Writers and Virginia Writers Club, which I happen to be the president of, just throw that out there, to put my work into contests, which I can't now that I'm president, so, I don't get to be in the anthology anymore, but...
this too shall pass.
This too shall pass.
Jack's a prior president.
Yeah.
Gary, I'm a prior president.
And you all survived, so it's good.
That's right.
But I'd leverage those contacts with writing groups that I belong to, and submit my work that way. Anthologies are great because of the publishing credit, and a lot of times when someone decides to do an anthology, right, Gary, that you have space to fill, and another publisher who might reject your story right out of hand because you're not an experienced writer in an anthology sometimes. Oops.
I'm still here.
We've lost her.
Still Susan.
You can get a writing credit in an anthology, and definitely I list them on my website, the various anthologies that I've been in. So yes, it's definitely something to try.
Susan?
Well, I've mostly submitted things by topic. So I've written something about my experience in getting ill, and I've sent that off to a medical magazine. I've written things that are about children, and I'm looking to be published based on these more essays. So I don't really have the experience yet of publishing. I have a line on a group that wants to publish more books about minorities, and so I'm hoping that that'll be a home for my book about Hasta Luego Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Jack.
For me, it's worked two ways. Part of the time I write for a specific audience, which means I already have a targeted market in mind, sometimes even a specific publication. And then the other part of the time I'm writing for myself because I'm interested in something, or the creative bug has hit me, or I just feel like it. And then a lot of times when that is done, I will retroactively go back and see, do I know a place where this might be a fit or a good place to share with somebody? And so both of those techniques have worked for me, although I'll say my success rate in publishing is much higher with the thing that I'm starting out, knowing where it's going and what my targeted audience is.
Yeah, it's a lot about audience now. We want to take some questions from the audience, and we're going to do a raffle for 3 copies of the anthology, and then there'll be anthologies for sale at a slight discount. I don't know where the microphone is.
She's got it right there.
Oh, great. Okay. So, do we have some questions from the audience?
Sarah, I had something I had written that I didn't read yet.
Okay.
And that was about how you had asked the question about integrating a writing life into our career. So unlike some of the others, I'm fairly new at this, and so I'm still integrating. So if you don't mind, I would just...
Sure.
I'll read it now. Okay. So the whole idea of integrating a writing life into my career is still an ongoing process. For anyone who has a passion to create, be it writing or painting or photography, it's difficult to fine-tune your craft when your job obligations demand your attention. So it seemed like whenever I was trying to devote time to write, the pragmatic left side of my brain would guilt the artsy right side of my brain. And so it would be a struggle, an internal struggle. And after years of attempting to satisfy my work ethic, I realized that there was a starving artist inside, and that I came to accept there would never be an end to the demands keeping me from the pleasure of sipping tea and indulging my laptop. So I had to schedule it. And so my way of doing that was to work compulsively, to multitask, and then I could justify the time that I needed to devote to writing. And so when you asked the question, it made me consider looking back at my past, like what did I have that I could offer to someone in terms of advice. And I think that for me, it's taking time every day at the beginning of the day or the end of the day to spend an hour or two just in the quiet and alone and jotting down ideas. And so I just wanted to add that to my contribution for today.
Yeah, and I'm sure lots of writing panels and authors you've heard this from them before, but the trick to starting a writing career is to write something every day, even if it's just a conversation you've overheard or an idea that's kind of percolating in your mind, even if it's 2 sentences, even if it's a list of words. I had a writing teacher one time, and he just kept a book with him, and he would write down a word every day that he didn't know and then try to use it in a sentence, and that's how he kind of got started. And he's won, I don't know, innumerable prizes now, Robert Olmsted. Oh, yeah. So you do just have to kind of make the time, and it's hard when you've got kids and a husband. And I have a newly retired husband who is joined at the hip lately, and I have to keep saying, I need to write, go away. So do we have any questions from the audience?
Over there.
About a pilot? Yes, Hugh.
I came in a little late, so maybe you already commented on it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the Virginia Writers group or club. However it's done.
The Virginia Writers Club.
Okay. The question is, what about the Virginia Writers Club? What does it do, and how is it organized, and how would you get involved in it? And the Blue Ridge chapter, of course, is the local Charlottesville chapter, and I'll let Phyllis tell you, I think there are 11
Yeah,
chapters or 12 or something?
if you count the 2 subchapters,
Northern Virginia?
well, no, there are 2 subchapters to Blue Ridge. There's
Oh.
Swag Riders, and then there's a brand new one called the Skyline Circle.
And SWAG is Stanton, Waynesboro.
Augusta group of writers. Virginia Writers Club is an almost 100-year-old organization that was started in Richmond by several men of letters. And our mission statement is that we foster writers and writing in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we do this through the chapters. The chapters actually, as with any, hierarchical organization, the chapters do a lot of the work. The chapters are the ones that hold workshops, weekend writers' conferences. The organization itself, VWC, we put on a one-day seminar symposium the first Saturday in August at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. And it's called Navigating Your Writing Life, and we always come up with a sub-theme that has to do with how you integrate writing into your life. And this year, the theme is along the lines of, so you've written a book, what next? And all the presentations, the workshops, and the panels are going to be focused on you have a manuscript in hand, now what do you do with it? Or you have a poetry manuscript, or you have a collection of essays.
And they usually have a keynote speaker who's a pretty big name person to come.
I think they won't mind if I say this. It's Jane Friedman this year, and she's a wonderful, wonderful teacher of writing, very supportive of independent or self-publishing writers, and she's going to be our keynote speaker, and we're very, very excited about it. That's about it. We have a website, virginiawritersclub.org, so please go there and take a look, and you can join. It's $15 for the first year and $30 a year for every year after that. And thank you for letting me.
And they have contests.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
do help because I think some of these
Yes.
Gary could probably tell you better. Gary Kessler in the back is the editor, and I meant to introduce him to you also. He's the guy behind the scenes whose commitment and time has made the anthology possible. He's a novelist, a poet, an editor, career diplomat, newspaper editor. He's the author of What the Spider Saw and a short story collection about the downtown mall. So he's and he's also has a pen name, Olivia Stowe, and he writes these. They're not called cozy mysteries, are they? Pretty close to cozy. Yeah, my favorite is the one about Savannah, where he goes through all the little gardens, and every little park has a story happening. Really fun. So,
I just had a question for Jack in terms of your writing, and how much does your writing reflect current events?
Since 2014, when many of you know I ran for Congress in the 7th District next door, the world is influencing my writing a lot more. That experience widened my horizons. I met so many people. I encountered many ideas that were new to me, and that experience also opened my eyes to politics in a different way in our country and government in a different way. And so even though I continue to write fiction and poetry and things that you wouldn't think would have much to do with politics or democracy or government, I would say that the world is influencing me now more than it ever has before. And it's in part because of that experience, and it's in part too because the world, it's getting hard to escape the world these days in a lot of ways in anything you write.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's quite a big influence on me in all the types of writing I do.
There's one over here.
there you go. Oh, good. Jean.
So I spent the past year and a half researching and writing and curating an exhibition.
Yeah,
for
start
the
again.
Maryland- So I spent the last year and a half writing, research and writing, and curating an exhibition at the Fralin Art Museum. So I basically had to put my personal writing aside, short stories and fiction and nonfiction. And so I wouldn't say I'm suffering from writer's block, but what's your favorite or your best tip when you get to a point where you're ready to start again, and what motivates you?
When I do writing classes with, and I do a lot of writing classes with teenagers because my third book is a Penn Faulkner Foundation selection with the writers in schools, so they send me to a lot of schools, and it's about a 16-year-old. So I use photographs a lot, photographs I've gotten from magazines or newspapers, and I let the kids do what happens next, what happened before, what are these people doing, what if you see this, what would happen? And the kids love that kind of it's just a hook. I guess they call it, it's not a hook, they call it a prompt. Mm-hmm. A prompt. And so you give yourself a couple of prompts or a what if, and all of a sudden, sometimes when I have an idea for a novel, I list the characters, and then I write a little character sketch about each one, like what kind of ice cream do they like, what would they do if their father died, and I give myself 10 different questions for each character, so I get a rounded view. Do you do character sketches?
I do, and I play with different genres. I'm principally a fiction writer, thrillers, but a couple of years ago I wrote a romance that I'll probably hide and tell my daughter when I die, don't you dare publish this. And this year I'm going to play around with fantasy. I've never written fantasy. I don't even read that much fantasy, but I'm gonna play around with a couple of leprechaun characters because I'm Irish. And the other thing is, when I have so many things in so many stages that if one goes stale, I'm lucky in that I can switch over to a draft of something else and kind of clear the other thing out of my head and focus on a different one. But those writing prompts, pictures or things like that, are great. They're really great. I participate in a weekly thing where we get a picture every week, and we have to write 150 to 200 words about it. And we post it within our private group, and everybody critiques it, and it's great fun.
Susan, how do you get yourself jump-started?
Well, I think for me, I really use the time that I reflect back on my life, and little tidbits kind of float to the top of experiences that I might have just cast aside. If I was thinking of writing something about cooking, and all of a sudden I had this image of my Italian grandmother who was standing at the gas stove in the apartment, and she had the typical grill of steak, and she had turned on the flame, and she was using it as if it were an outdoor grill. And so there was flames and there was smoke, but it was like, I think about how my grandfather used the bathroom for a chicken coop. And that they'd come from this kind of primitive farm-like living in Sicily to living in this apartment, and they just hadn't adapted. So these stories, as they pop up, I write them down because I might use them later as part of a bigger essay. But I go back into the past, I guess. I love the idea of writing about a photograph, though. That sounds really fun. Yeah.
Jack?
Well, you already heard one of my writer's block's tips, which is to call yourself and leave yourself an angry message. But another thing I do is I pick up a book or a piece of writing that's as close to what I'm trying to work on as it can be, and I start reading instead of writing. And usually what happens is I get mad and say, that's not the way it's supposed to be, and then I can start again. So that's another trick I try sometimes.
Yes.
I respond.
I wondered if Gary had a question, because he's the...
It's not a question. I want to talk to Jane, and it's to other people too. I know what you're working on. I know what you write. And start from where you are, where you write. If you want to write, right now you're in nonfiction, and you're talking about the baths, aren't you? And at Hot Springs. Well, you can sit there and you can go back to Jefferson's time, and you can write on the basis of what was there then. Write from what, I don't always say write from what you know, because people need to expand. They need to go find stuff they don't know to write about. But in your case, for the block, you start where you are.
Do you have another question? No? Okay, I have one more for you guys. With Gary behind us here, I wondered if working with a professional editor obviously is one of the benefits of publishing in journals and anthologies, particularly with somebody as experienced and precise as Gary is. I wondered if you could give any advice on the purpose and power of editing and the process of accepting or challenging an editor's suggestions.
Well, I am an editor as well. For 11 years, I was editor of an aviation magazine, and I do edit other people's work now. In fact, I just got finished with someone's project over the weekend. It's a very delicate relationship sometimes, and you have to have respect for the editor. Gary is great to work with because he will listen to you when I had a story that was published in one a couple years ago that had a particular voice, and I really didn't want that voice changed, and he was very open to that. But he's also a very experienced editor, and so I'm sure he's had people, and I've had people who have rejected what I've done. And I think you have to choose carefully. You have to look into that editor's background, particularly if you're an indie or a self-published writer, and please don't self-publish without getting somebody else to edit it, please. I'm begging you. Because it's so important to put yourself out into the world, and you want to put the best out there. And even though I've been editing stuff since I was a high school teacher, I can't edit my own work because, every word is golden when it's your own work. And you really need to find someone who will be honest with you, who will establish a relationship with you, whose opinion you respect, but who will be honest with you and say, you need to cut this whole scene because it does nothing for your work. Now, you can cut it, but go put it somewhere because you can work it into something else. But you have to be willing to, it's a cliche, to kill your darlings. But it's very, very important to have an editor that you respect, like Gary, knowing his background and knowing how experienced he is, and being willing to take the suggestions that an editor makes. And he's always made great suggestions with my stuff that have really helped it. So,
Susie?
Well, I have a friend who is an editor, and I can send her my work in progress. So I really appreciate that she can stop me when I'm going down the wrong path. And we really have a wonderful relationship. She doesn't always agree with something that I'm writing, but she'll tell me, and I love that about her because I feel like I am kind of the babe in the woods with all of this, and so she's been around much longer than I am. So I listen very carefully, and I will adjust my writing. I appreciate that Gary has chosen some of the work that I've had published in the Daily Progress to be a part of the anthology. So he hasn't had to touch it too much, but if he did, I would also appreciate it. This year I submitted some poetry, so that was a little branch out for me. And I've heard some good things about that, so I might have to try my hand at that a little more.
Jack, you've had a lot of editors.
I once knew an editor. That's true. Actually, in academia, you learn that your ego gets you nowhere, and that editorial feedback is the key to being successful. And so over the years, I've had my share of scars from editorial battles. But over the years, I've also learned that there is nothing as golden as good editing. And as has been mentioned consistently, you can't do it yourself. And in my experiences with Gary, I think he would testify that I fought less and less with him over the years. And, and now sometimes he gets an email from me saying, fine, roll with it. But it's very valuable.